Yesterday you saw those live pictures of the landing of the plane carrying the US Speaker Nancy Pelosi as it landed at Taipei City airport in Taiwan. The first time in 25 years that the third in line to the US presidency has gone to Taiwan. China says Taiwan is a province of China. China has said this is a provocation, that the US's conduct is unacceptable. Dr. Martyn Davies is in charge of emerging markets for Deloitte Africa. He joins us now. Dr. Davies, good afternoon to you. We see Nancy Pelosi landing despite the Chinese threats. How do you see this playing out? Could there be some kind of economic response from China? Dr. Davies, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself unless we've got something wrong on our side. Don't worry, you're not the first person to do it to me today. All right. Will there be an economic response?
Apologies. There will be a multi-pronged response. There's a few things that antagonize Beijing as the U.S., as they see it, as interference with domestic issues, that is policy vis-a-vis Taiwan, which is, as you allude to, is regarded by Beijing as nothing more than a renegade province. So I think the response would be, of course, the saber rattling currently, military drills, military exercises, onshore, offshore, in and around Taiwan. There'll be certainly an economic response, and I expect some serious sort of sanction headwinds for U.S. multinationals operating in China. The business environment is already pretty increasingly fraught for U.S. multinationals, not to mention other countries in China. And I think it's going to get a lot more challenging going forward as Beijing retaliates.
There's a huge amount of trade between the US and China. I mean, possibly the biggest amount of trade between two nation states in the history of the world. Could China afford to upset that trade in some way? I mean, the United States still has a bigger economy.
Yes, there's certainly a codependence here. Is at the same time, we should not forget the China. Beijing buying U.S. securities and bonds. So it's also significant debt dependence as well. And the two economies are certainly intertwined, at least commercially, but increasingly diverging geopolitically. How will this be managed going forward? Well, nobody knows. But I think the tit for tat that started particularly was very obvious under the Donald Trump administration, where there was very, how should we say, surgical targeting of key Chinese companies that even continues under the Democratic administration. No surprise there, I think. But again, the Chinese are retaliating perhaps in a less public manner, but certainly in a more sort of private fashion of starting to make life more difficult, more uncomfortable for U.S. multinationals operating in China itself.
We see in South Africa, we just see China as this huge economy, a massive market, over 1 billion people, 1.4 billion people, a country rising. Is that rise unstoppable, or are there certain problems that its leaders are facing at the moment?
I think, this is, can it be reversed? No. Is China a great power? Yes. Does it seek to increase it's to be more assertive on the global stage? Undoubtedly. And it's just natural. A rising power will increasingly, they'll come into conflict of various sorts, or frictions at best, with the United States. Let's not forget, of course, that the U.S. also is not just an Atlantic, but particularly a Pacific power. Projects power into Asia and has very much of an encirclement strategy vis-a-vis the People's Republic. This extends from India, arguably, certainly through Southeast Asia, think Philippines, think Taiwan included, or up to South Korea, where there's a significant number, and Japan, of course, as well, Okinawa, where there are tens of thousands of U.S. troops based. So a strong military presence in the region, and one that certainly Beijing would feel is one that is encircling it. And the frictions are certainly evident in Southeast Asia around territorial disputes that are claimed by the likes of Vietnam, Philippines, but also by China. And this is where the U.S. arguably has certainly a strategic balancing sort of force to play in the region.
The United States has certain economic problems at the moment. They've got very high inflation, the highest that people can really remember. Quite low unemployment, if I've understood the figures correctly. What's the situation in China at the moment? How's their economy? They still, from time to time, are worried about more COVID lockdowns.
Well, China is currently, what you alluded to earlier, Stephen, is China. Have we reached peak China? I think peak China economically, no. China's slowing, of course. But if you look back to the Atlantic financial crisis of 2008-2009, the financial shock, China's economy is more than double the size today than it was over a decade ago. Such is the power of compound annual growth. Growth forecast this year, 5.5%, will probably not reach that. But China's the world's second biggest economy. It's, of course, it has domestic challenges, particularly the state and enterprise sector, housing market under pressure, rising youth unemployment, nowhere near the levels of our country, for example, but certainly high by Asian standards. So China has its own travails to go through, certainly not as pronounced as other countries, think in the global south. But China's done incredible, also often hard to really fathom from a policy perspective, how China has carried out structural reform over the course of the last generation and a half or so is a real model for developing countries. The challenge being is it's very difficult to understand exactly how they pulled this off, considering the political system, the previous strong state dominance in the economy, and many contradictions that it has internally in terms of a capitalist system being married to a de facto one-party state.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Martyn Davies. Really do appreciate it, head of emerging markets at Deloitte.